So we heard a bit about digital preservation and decentralized storage earlier today. Now we're going to talk with three people who are major players on the infrastructure side, each in a different way. So it's a pleasure to introduce Arkadiy Kukarkin, a multidisciplinary practitioner who explores the relationship between creative labor and reward, the nature of value, and designs systems that support expression without compromising intent. He is the decentralization lead at the Internet Archive, where he works on experimental integrations with decentralized storage technologies. Then we've got River Davis, who is the global head of brand at Titan. He can tell us more about what their decentralized infrastructure does. I'm still learning about it. And he's developing innovative approaches to creating and distributing content that cuts through algorithmic noise. And finally, we have Alex Fischer. He's the founder of Perma Web Journal, which is an on-chain publication covering the Arweave and AO ecosystem. He's also the comms lead at Bazaar Marketplace, which is a digital asset marketplace built on Arweave and AO. Thanks for joining us today, guys. Okay, so I've been using the Internet Archive since I can remember. I've thought that I've lost tons of content, seen like thousands of things be deleted that I've edited or written or touched in some way. And time again, the Internet Archive has come in and like kind of saved the day, just knowing that there's a backup somewhere. So can you tell us a bit about like how you came to this space and like what the overlap is between decentralization and the Internet Archive?
Well, there's at least three separate ways in which they connect. And the first is actually that the archive is not just a library, it is also very much a civically and politically minded organization that believes that centralization of power on the internet has been one of the biggest causes of the global situation that we have entered over the last decade and a half. So we aim to champion decentralization, both technological and in the power domain. And we see these technologies as being potential but not necessarily always successful tools in that vein. Secondly, we do have, our infrastructure is embodied. We have physical data centers that have their physical vulnerabilities. We are in political jurisdictions that carry significant risks or significantly increasing risks, one could say. And we also generally, or at least this is a personal view to some extent, but I believe that the nature of like the backup being in a box somewhere, or even just a couple of boxes somewhere, is just a crutch, and memory should be a core part of internet protocols rather than a bolt-on. And lastly, the Web3 native content, despite the claims that are being made about it, very brazenly, is actually equally, if not more brittle than traditional Web2 content in many cases. So, yeah.
Amazing. And so River, you're saying that Titan is part of the infrastructure of TikTok, which really surprised me because when I think of TikTok, I don't think about decentralization at all. Can you tell us a bit about what that relationship looks like and what Titan brings to the decentralized infrastructure landscape?
Yeah, so essentially Titan Network is a web service provider via decentralized physical infrastructure network. And basically what that means is that we provide a service similar to AWS or Google, in which we do CDN, data storage, bandwidth, compute, But the difference is that we've activated individual users to be cloud service providers. So every day, use your cell phone, use your computer, your tablets, but you don't use all of them 24/7, right? So you have idle devices, which means you have idle resources, which we allow users to sell back to companies like TikTok to provide services like CDN, data storage, bandwidth, and compute. So TikTok uses Titan to save 50 to 75% on their CDN costs because we have been able to arbitrage the CDN market through individuals like all of you who can provide unused bandwidth resources to TikTok on the edge. So we have the furthest delivery, which gives them, the best latency option to deliver content to people. So that's essentially how we work with TikTok and other companies.
And so CDN for the uninitiated content delivery network?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Cool.
It's essentially kind of like, I'm sure everyone knows like torrents, right? And it's like seeding. It's like, okay, well, you have your unused resources, and then you're essentially seeding those, but instead of just doing it out of the goodness of your heart and saying like, oh, I have this movie from 1996 that's super obscure that I want other people to be able to have, it's you actually get paid for that. And so putting the kind of power back into the hands of the individual and decentralizing it in a way where we're taking it away from, these centralized multinationals like Amazon and Google and, Alibaba, et cetera.
Okay, so the wheels are turning. I definitely want to come back to the cost issue. But first, I want to hear from Alex because Arweave promises that it offers permanent storage. And that's a big claim. So I'm curious if you can explain a bit about what is actually happening. Like if someone, from the moment that someone is storing, let's say like an article on Arweave's decentralized storage system, to ensuring that it will exist there in 100 years, 200 years, because it's 200 years that you sell the packages at, right?
Yes. Arweave's a decentralized data storage network, and it works with you pay once and you can store data for a long period of time, and it works because there's a sustainable endowment program there that when you pay to upload data, if you're going to upload an article, you are going to use an AR token, or there's bundled ways that you can use fiat currency, and you upload this data to Arweave, and part of the payment goes towards this endowment. And the whole idea is that the cost of data storage has gone down exponentially over the past 30, 40 years, and it's most likely going to keep going like this. And so there was like a conservative claims that it would keep going down. So as this endowment is holding more AR, this incentivizes the miners to continue storing this data. And so as a journalist, if you're uploading this data, you can ensure that you're going to have it decentralized. It's sent over to hundreds of different nodes immediately as you upload, and you'll have a transaction ID that you can always get access to that article. And that's pretty much how it works when you upload it there.
Cool. Okay, so open question for the panel. In each of these systems, like let's imagine the most apocalyptic scenario. Like what would actually have to happen for these networks to go down, or so that content couldn't be retrieved from them? Because with centralized servers, especially like, in the journalistic context, you hear about a journalist's office getting raided and they just pick up the servers and walk out of the building, and then like no more media institution. But with these decentralized systems, there's more resilience and redundancy. But like worst case scenario, like when do they fail?
Token price goes low enough that the expected value of continued operation is lower than the cost of selling the equipment right that moment.
Yeah, I'd say that's a very fair claim there, and I'd say that there is incentives, kind of feedback there, but there's incentives to ensure that the data is stored, and as Arweave's a utility token, there's a lot of fiat, there's a lot of bundlers to upload the data that use fiat money to do it, so I think that there is still value in that, because the miners can make their money in fiat currency in that case.
I guess the worst case apocalyptic situation would be that the grid goes down and then we have no power or electricity to retrieve any of that data, which would be like the biggest issue with any of our technology. I don't know if any of this kind of solves for that problem in the end. I guess that's like the vision that I fear for the whole like kind of technology-based world that we live in, is like, okay, what happens if there is a catastrophic event and then it's like, okay, well, at least we have the data centers that still, it's like, it's there, but it's not necessarily accessible without the power. So essentially it does live infinitely as long as we can kind of access it and power it, which is great because it's like a distributed Library of Alexandria, right? Like one of them can be burned down, but you have redundancy like across the world, which I think makes it more interesting, right? Like we've decentralized all of this to a point where it's almost impossible to get rid of all of it, you know? I don't know if that answers the question, but definitely something to think about.
Yeah, it gives me hope. And so, okay, assuming that there isn't a massive solar flare that's like knocking everything offline, how do the economic incentives work when things are functioning at their peak? Like, who's paying for the long-term preservation, and how can we make sure that the journalistic works that we're entrusting to these systems don't get garbage collected? Like, I've heard this can happen with IPFS, where content will just sort of get like shuffled out for some reason, and that it's not reliable to be able to recall it all of the time.
Content is not stored on IPFS. IPFS is a way to get content that lives in a normal place or maybe on a Filecoin node, but the fact that you have things that are just sticking around there is just an artifact of how gateways are designed or have been designed.
Okay, good to know. More hope. Alex, can you talk a bit more about the economic incentives of Arweave?
So, yeah, like I was saying about like the endowment system where, yeah, once you were to pay to upload, then the miners are incentivized to continue holding this data there. And also with, yeah, like I was saying, like the cost of data storage going down over time, they will continue to hold this data. And yeah, it's a little expensive to upload data on Arweave at first because you're paying once, but you don't have to continue to pay these monthly fees. So that's the challenging thing with storing large archives at times, is that you're going to have to pay a very large upfront fee, but as the cost of data storage goes down, you continue to get more sustainable, I'd say.
Can I ask who holds the RWAs for the endowment? Like where the entity is?
I do not know that off the top of my head. Yeah.
I think what's really appealing about Arweave for me, disclosure, my company Control X is using Arweave storage system for our infrastructure right now. But it's this concept of just paying once for a lifespan and kind of avoiding that Black Mirror scenario. I don't know if everyone's seen the new season, where the company that holds all the cards just keeps jacking the price up and up and up because they create this dependency, and then you're stuck. There's no way to get out of it. But so for journalistic organizations that are hemorrhaging money right now to the point where they have to fire their whole staffs pretty much, how do we make this infrastructure more cost-effective than centralized systems and kind of like navigate our way out of what could be a very like fragile state for the industry?
For us, it's about putting that power into the hands of the individual and taking it away from centralized institutions. So the idle resources that you have, right, the storage on your phone, you can essentially sell that back to an enterprise at a cheaper price, because right now you're not making any money on it. In fact, every idle resource that you're not using essentially is wasted. And so the price value that you have for that is nothing. So anything above zero is a positive for you because you're making that money back. And so if we can incentivize users to join the decentralized physical infrastructure network via financial means, well, then it's like, okay, we can give you 80% of the total profit share. We take what we need to run like at a 20%, and then TikTok on the other side, on the other hand, who's desperate for cost savings because capitalism and their incentive is to make as much money as possible, actually then puts all the money back into your, like the pockets of individuals. And so I think if we continue to work towards that, the global network of web service distribution then just becomes everyone in this room, right? And it's not based on you know, a data center here or a data center there. And then if we look at the development globally, and so say for example, India, Africa, and South America, the production pipeline and development pipeline for these major corporations to implement data centers at high levels is, you know, over a 10 or 20 year pipeline, right? And so they're not, those countries and continents aren't going to have the same access that we have at the same speed, at the same price, because it's not as interesting for them to develop in those countries at pace, right? And so we can essentially front run the market in all of those countries by giving the users direct access to create the network that delivers the content, that holds the storage, right? And another thing that now, because we're not centralized, like the control is with the initial creator. So in terms of journalism, if your redundancy is thousands of people across the world through a decentralized network, right? There's no one source that's going to be able to go to every single one of those places and take your articles down or remove them in any sort of way or censor you, right? Because your network is every individual. So for, like, I guess a little example would be, you know, we all have storage that we pay for on our phone, like through the cloud, but that we also have the storage on the phone, right? And so what happens, like for us, is a percentage of that you can allocate, you can get paid for, and then we store encrypted data on the phone. And so you're not, like, you can't see the documents, you can't see what's being stored there, it's completely private and encrypted, but at the end, if your neighbor, you know, wants to make a call to that article, well, a piece comes from you, a piece comes from another neighbor, a piece comes from down the street, and then essentially the content delivery is at a fast enough pace to compete with what we're seeing from traditional cloud service providers.
It sounds a bit like your economic model assumes free power, free unlimited ingress and outgress, and no depreciation cost from additional usage of the device, right?
Sounds about right.
Okay.
Well, I guess we have to make assumptions in every move for the future. But okay, so this is the infrastructure layer. This is like the base layer. What do you think now needs to happen on the layers that are building on top of it? Like, if we think about the end user at the very top, there's some middle connective tissue, and we can call them publications, for lack of better terms, or independent media companies, like small ones popping up to replace the collapse of these larger legacy systems. What do they need to be focusing on in order to handle how the content that they're producing and generating is maintained and preserved, especially around like privacy issues, for example, and the right to be forgotten? I almost don't even want to bring it up in this panel, but any kind of like takedowns that might be necessary for whatever reason.
So I think it's really critical to differentiate kind of two classes of users. One, which is a sort of the user you're describing here, which is like either Web3 native or a transition organization that is specifically storing a particular piece of content with a particular intent and under particular terms that they have kind of thought through. And on the other hand, we have users that are more like ourselves, though, increasingly more and more organizations in a similar situation which are doing bulk archiving. They're doing bulk archiving of things that are being collected under fair use or under public domain as pertains to government data and things of that nature. And I think those two sets of requirements are dramatically different. And I will hand that over to our two implementers to see how they would approach it.
So, as in the sense of, I think a big thing too for the users is that this data is on these decentralized networks. It's stored, and it's it's accessible on different user interfaces. And I think that's interesting, where like you can spin up a user interface and serve data, but then you can spin up another user interface and serve that same data in a different way. And I think that there's going to be different use cases where in certain jurisdictions, maybe a certain user interface, like a website, gets shut down, but that data is still going to live and it could be still accessible somewhere else. So I think that there's definitely use cases for that, and be able to index all of this big like shared data pool there. And that's where, yeah, there's going to be less opportunity to like really take down articles and be able to really censor content there.
I agree. I think data structure is something that these companies should be considering highly, and I think Internet Archive has set a great example for metadata infrastructure. Like, so you go onto the site, you find something that you like, and it has everything broken down into a very precise order, and as much of that information that can be provided gives the user or anyone who would be standing up a UI to say, hey, these are the specific fields that need to be included if I want to display some of this information. So it's accessibility in the data that you're creating. How do you format it? How do you make it in a way that is so easily accessible that anyone can then decide, oh, this was a really meaningful publication that got taken down in X year because of whatever reason. I'm going to restand this up and put my energy behind this to make sure that it's continued to be seen by the world. But if you don't have that structure, no one's going to be able to find it, no one's going to be able to support it, or you're going to create a lot of work for the person who did somehow through the dark web, through like the infinite nothingness of unclassified data, finds it, and then decides, okay, now I have to reclassify all of this data into a structure to then put it, and that's a crazy amount of work for anyone.
Yeah, we're on the other side. I gave a talk at DEF CON a couple years ago using an example from, I think, the Minnesota Star Tribune, where it was acquired by an entity that did not share the political leanings of the majority of the publication, and so they bought it, took it offline, and then some activists kind of got together and said, well, we want everyone to be able to enjoy this content forever, put it back up, and then got sued by the new parent organization for not having the rights to host it.
It's a very delicate legal dance, and which is why a lot of the data in large-scale collections, even if it's data that is in the public interest, is not actually directly accessible as unauthenticated plain text. And this is something that a lot of the networks that we're talking about really need to think about very hard, because in our case, there's a policy team that, depending on particular exposures in particular jurisdictions, makes very, very difficult choices to balance our continued operation and legal compliance, as well as, in some cases, moral or ethical choices that kind of fall upon us. We have things, or networks of this type often have things like collaborative filter lists where you have double hashed lists of things that are not okay in some way and so on. But these efforts are still very nascent, and I am yet to see a really good answer.
Challenge accepted. Okay, well, I have one question. So we have a panel on AI coming up later, but just like quick litmus test for each of you. Like, how is AI going to change what's going on in each of your institutions?
I think going back to the example that was brought up about the spinning up a UI, as well as data structuring, I think AI can handle a lot of that in the future, right? And so you don't have to be as savvy in your creative process. You don't have to know as much as you did before. It takes much less time. And so you, in theory, would be able to spin up and say, hey, I want to create X topic. I want to find all of the publications or all of the content and media that I can about this specific, Picasso between 1954 and 1957 when he used a specific color blue, right? And then you can spin that up. You can create the user interface quickly. You can have the assets put together, and now you have a curation of an interesting experience that otherwise would have taken a team of people a year or multiple years to even consider getting into the public sphere. I think also, before I pass this off, is like credit, right? Or who deserves the credit for this specific thing, right? Where is the source coming from? And I think the big issue is like, oh, well, how did all these big AI data come, like, where did they get their data from, right? It's like, oh, well, they didn't request it from any of us. They didn't pay any of us. And so I think decentralization offers a huge opportunity to be able to credit creators from the source, right? And so I've talked about this before, but for example, if my mom wants to, she loves using Midjourney to make cats, like weird cat things, like ceramic cat sculptures and whatever. So if that data set is based on all of the cat pictures that were accumulated through the scraping and whatever other ways that they got the data, right? But none of those photographers or artists are credited in that data set in any type of way. So if we were to put that data set on chain, and each one of those assets theoretically as an NFT that was associated to the creator's wallet, that every time Midjourney ran that model and touched one of those data points in the diffusion model, a fraction of a penny or something would then go into that account for that creator as that credit, right? And now we're generating 100,000 cat images a day at fractions of a penny. That could be $10 or $100 or $1,000 for the creators who existed in the world who contributed to that data set, right? And now we've decentralized. It's almost like user-generated content. Like, why did Google Maps get so good? Right? Well, it's like they incentivized people to go around and take pictures and get credit and like put ratings and reviews on the restaurants. It's like, okay, well, now everyone's going to be trying to take and input all of the content that they can on the internet to be able to get the credit and be the source validator of that information. That's kind of where my perspective on the value of AI within this framework would be.
Yeah, now Google Maps just sends pop-ups about construction in the middle of the map while I'm driving. How do I make those go away? Yeah, thoughts on AI?
Yeah, I would definitely agree there. And I think that with decentralized networks, if you're uploading data, like I think there's really cool opportunities to, within the metadata, have some type of data license where when this piece of content is uploaded, you have like a license there. It says if an AI company wants to use this data in their training data, like in their training models, then you'd have to pay like something like fractions of a penny for this. And also with that too is like when you upload that content and it's on a decentralized network, it can be verified. There's a provenance to it where I feel like a lot of AI like chatbots and stuff kind of hallucinate at times when you ask it certain information, and like you can, I mean, you like really can't like verify. Like I think like Perplexity does a good job of showing some of the like sources it gets there, but like there's times where I feel like like a lot of these bots, chat bots hallucinate, and I think having the provenance of data and be able to see like, oh, this is where the source is coming from. Like this person uploaded this article, and you can verify it's a real article and a real journalist that wrote it. And I think that is really helpful in an age where, I mean, we're using chatbots more than like Google search sometimes. And even like on Google search, we're getting a lot of AI generated answers. So I think having provenance is really important for training data there.
Yeah, let's see if Perplexity ever pays for it.
Well, yeah, that's a big
Doubt
part of
it.
it too.
Arkadiy, you want to close us out?
So as you could probably imagine, I think this is a very double-edged thing. And on the one hand, well, actually, let's start with maybe the darker part, which is that, as many of you know, the training entities have taken a variety of routes to obtain their data. Some of them were legitimate, some of them were like scraping libgen, just like doing double piracy. And some of this was, and still is to a certain extent, at least visible in the decentralized world, because you generally have requests coming into things like our servers, and we're like, oh, this range of AWS instances sure really is interested in cats at a rate of like billions of requests per second. However, when the data is available in decentralized networks, actually attribution of access in decentralized networks is a very hard problem. And there are people in the adjacent space who are doing good work, especially here in Europe, trying to create clean or attributable training sets, public AI models, people like Matt Dryhurst. And I very much support that effort. But I guess for us, the third thing is basically the pre-slop, post-slop divide that there is like a line in the bedrock within our collections where I think there is a certain value of us being able to sort of trace the line and say, hey, you can trust this stuff under here, everything above this, trust but verify, maybe.
I love that, and that's why for the journalists out here, please start thinking about how to go get your archives. Wherever they are spread out over the web, you want to make sure that you have them for the future, because we're now in the post-slop era. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been a really enlightening panel. Big round of applause for our panelists.